Hello and welcome to the Friday night interview with Cast Iron. I'm Andrew Allen, and every Friday night we're chatting to a Brighton-based creative about the work they're doing or maybe not doing during this time of lockdown. And this week's guest is Tim McQuillen-Wright. Hello, how are you?
Hey Andrew, I'm very good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm all right. How's the current climate treating you?
Well, do you know what? I mean, my goals, I guess, are pretty limited. I think just staying healthy and staying sane are all I'm aiming for. So I'm, not doing any writing, learning the banjo, serbo croat, anything like that. It's just about basically make my wife laugh as often as possible, eat sensibly, and at least once or twice a week, and then get through it and crack on and see what we can achieve in the next week, really.
But those are fairly lofty aims, aren't they? I mean, I think a few people have been feeling guilty that they are not knitting scarves or they're not learning new languages, and just it sounds like it's counterproductive. It sounds like it's been deliberately negative. Or just get through the day, but that's actually not a bad aim at all. It can be sort of just quite helpful to just take a breath.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, ultimately we have been given a task to not spread a virus. That is our one task. Anything we want to do on top of that really is up to us. But anything that we do on top of that diminishes the first task is clearly wrong. So I've taken that first task and I've run with it basically by being utterly terrified of any kind of fresh air.
I think that's.
So I'm staying.
Yeah, I was saying to somebody last week of when you anecdotally speak to kids in the future, grandparents now will talk about the war and say, "Oh, remember chocolate?" Or we didn't see a Satsuma for ages. Now we're going to be going, "You remember fresh air? We didn't have fresh air for 10 weeks." So it can be, you can recenter yourself about what the world is about. How have you been keeping sane? How have you been laughing? What have you been watching or reading?
Well, do you know what? I haven't found myself reading any more than I normally would, which is it is the disappointing thing.
Is that indicative of the fact that you read a lot anyway?
No, I'm not a big reader at all, but I do read every day, just a little bit, and I would have totally expected that during this time I would at least find the time of an afternoon to sit down for a couple of hours and properly sort of devour. But I think there's this freelancers mentality, even though there really is no work in the entire industry, not just my little bit of it, but there's still this freelancers feeling that if I sit down and watch TV in the afternoon or read a book in the afternoon, then I'm absolutely wasting my time. So it's very difficult to do that. But having said that, there are a number of books on the go. You know what it's like. It's nice to be able to focus on one book, but that's often not possible. Number of books on the go. In terms of TV, we've done the Netflix thing, and we will continue to do the Netflix thing, but we're not in the middle of anything, so I can't give you
a recommendation.
No, well, I can recommend, and this I mention this because I find this a little bit bizarre, I guess, that we are living through this apocalyptic time, and the best things that I've seen, or the things that I've really loved on Netflix, are stuff like Caliphate, which is about the Syrian problems, just to totally put it down into some crass nutshell. But talking about fundamentalist terrorists, it's an extraordinary series. Yeah. Not exactly the escapism you would think would be necessary at this time, but I don't know whether just aiming for a side of real life which is so traumatizing, maybe that does make things easier, and maybe it puts it in perspective. This is not a thought through thesis I'm delivering now.
No, but I guess there's a sense of, if we're learning anything about the world at the moment, it's that we should learn more about the world at the moment, and it just sort of becomes better armor.
That is very good.
Thank you. I'll write that down.
Very successful.
Well, you spoke a little bit
That's very
about.
nice.
Thank you. You spoke a little bit about your little pocket of the industry, and it might be that some people watching this don't yet know what that is, even though it will be in the bio that we write up and stuff. So, how would you describe your little pocket of the industry?
Well, I've always been a set designer for theatre, and occasionally, very occasionally, costume. More so a while ago. I try not to do costume now, but so I mean, whilst I hate the phrase normal theatre, nevertheless, this sense of fixed view theatre is what I've always done. But the last 5 years have been more immersive theatre and event-based participatory theatre, if you like. And that, as an industry, I mean, I think as a genre, that's something that's been going on for a very, very long time. But as an industry, it's pretty new. And this idea of how to make that financially viable, that's a question that the industry is trying to sort out at the moment, because there's a lot of shows that take place, and I've been lucky enough to do quite a few of them, but they don't generate any funds, really. They do well to break even, much like the rest of theatre, to be honest. And so there's this whole new thing that we're trying bit by bit with each show that we do, trying to investigate how things can be done either more cost effectively or to a broader audience, not just that sort of mid-20s, affluent London set. And those things we can't answer yet. But what's interesting now is, of course, that the industry of theatre as a whole has had to respond in some way. I don't know. Well, it certainly is responding. Quite how it's adapting is another question. But it's having to find those answers again. How do you find a financial way? How do you monetize the ideas for getting theatre to the audience when you can't get people in a big group? So yeah, with all these sort of questions bouncing around, and a lot of people trying to find different solutions, I think. Do stop me, by the way, if I totally forget what your original question was.
I hardly.
But there's this sense. I know that there's been a lot of talk of, the creative industries will, they are creative. They will find a way through. But the creative people in theatre, I'd like to think I'm one of those people. Obviously, you are those people as well. We are simply not used to solving problems of how to monetize.
Yeah.
That's not what we do. We make things perhaps more efficient within the resources. We make things better, hopefully. But in terms of monetizing an idea, that's not what we do. So it's quite interesting seeing how immersive theatre and normal theatre are now both just searching for ideas, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, I first met you, what we might call like sort of non-professional theatre, because you were directing the production of art. And my main experience in my career has been non-professional or fringe theatre. As a director, I've certainly come to the conclusion that, and as a writer even, when I'm writing for my own performances, my own shows, that I'm in danger of being emotionally and mentally restricted to a fringe idea of going, well, I can't write a play that has a big platform or a huge diorama or whatever, because I only have £7 to work with, and if I got a commission, it would take a bit of mental U-turns for me to go, oh no, I've got a bit of a budget. Because you do occasionally, more than occasionally, work in the non-professional sector, and you do work in productions that have a bit more of a budget to them, although I imagine that you'll still get people telling you no. Is that helpful or confusing that you've got ongoing experience in both platforms?
Do you know what? I've never looked at the two sides of things with that question in mind. I've never found myself doing fringe or non-professional theatre and thinking, oh God, of course. Now, if we transferred or if we had the budget, then we'd do this. We'd have a Revolve, or we'd have a helicopter or whatever. And equally, actually, in the bigger stuff, I'm trying to keep on checking myself here. I'm thinking, I might. It's always this danger, isn't it, of thinking in 2 minutes' time I'm going to totally contradict everything I've said. But I don't think in the bigger stuff I have yearned for paring stuff down. I think when you take a script, or sometimes it's just an idea for a performance, certainly in the immersive stuff, it's an idea for a performance rather than necessarily a script. You take that, and that's sort of one element that you've got. And you could think of that in itself as being a restriction because it is a script, but it's not a restriction. It's sort of the start of the blueprint, isn't it? But you then start adding in all these other things like the budget, the space, and all those other things. And I've never, to my knowledge, I've never thought of those extra things as being restrictions. They are just extra blocks in the Jenga tower that creates the thing at the end.
Immersive theatre Jenga. Now there's a thing. I mean, it could be it could be terrifying. It could be. I mean, the health and safety on that alone would be extraordinary. Let's talk about some of the stuff that you have designed before. You've been kind enough to share with us some images of work you've done. We've got up here some designs for Blue Membered Hills, which is Dennis Potter. It's famously the play where adults are playing children. It's I guess I've only heard the words memory play applied to Tennessee Williams, but I think this can be called a memory play of that sort of a golden summer where kids act like kids, and that's not always a good thing. So, how did you approach Blue Membered Hills?
Do you know, it was a really wonderful collaboration, this one. I really enjoyed the time the director and I had together, and the lighting designer was on board from a pretty early stage as well. And to be honest, I don't know how other designers and how their work, what their balance is like and how they work, what their processes are. But for me, it's quite rare that you get that collaboration when you're just looking at an empty model box and you're starting to play with ideas and talk about themes and things. I know in the much grander types of theatre, with stuff like the National and the RSC, where I've never designed for, but I've been associate for, so I've been very much in the room when it happens, but certainly not, crikey, no, long way away from working those sorts of places. That sort of vibe has existed. So I know that it is across the industry, but certainly in the stuff that I do, it's quite rare. And we chatted about the piece, and I think there was that initial conversation, which I guess everybody has whilst talking about this one, in what impact having the kids played by adults has. And Dennis Potter, it makes it very easy actually for anyone putting on this play, because he's written at the beginning of the script why he's written them to be played by adults. And you go, great, okay, fine. I mean, when you investigate a script and you all get round a table and you talk about what the hell did the writer mean here, what did they mean there, it's so much easier if they just put it down there in the introduction. Because it's such a key concept to it. So we discussed that, and for my memory of it, because it was quite some years ago, might be 15 years ago now, but I don't think that concept was the one that then moved things forward. I think it was very much a case of wanting to, that the end is such a surprise. Okay, let me just backtrack on that a little bit. Because the end, it's a beautiful ending because it's a surprise whilst being a totally believable surprise. I guess that's the feeling. So it's the best kind of surprise because it doesn't feel like it hasn't earned its position there. And
there's an element
we all communicate.
feels inevitable. Well, once it's happened, it feels like, oh, we're always going to be here.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And you want to say to the audience, or you want the audience to feel, I should have seen that coming.
Yeah.
I should have been prepared. I am traumatized by the fact that I don't know, give too much away about this play that's obviously decades old, but the kid doesn't have a happy ending.
No.
And you want people to be shocked at how this can have happened. And by them not realizing it, but also, as you say, realizing that there was an inevitability about it, it kind of makes you feel complicit as an audience. It makes you feel that in some way you've contributed to that kid's peril.
Yeah.
And it was a conversation which fascinated all of us. And so the idea started with, shall we then, for whatever the stage space ends up being, should it in some way represent a permanent sense of the barn where he meets his end?
Yeah.
So that is, even when we're outside, running around the fields, whatever it is, there is this presence. And this presence of the barn, we felt, would be a subtler thing to sort of taunt the audience into forgetting it's there, if it was slightly, a sort of symbolic version of it. So that was the starting point. And so this sense that as you can see in the pictures, actually, I've got them up on my screen as well, the slats of the barn, we sort of morphed into being like smoke. So yeah, nothing was straight. It was like smoke, but it was also like the forest, and it was all these sorts of things. And that really was the central idea. It was about homing in on one moment right at the end of the play, where if we had the audience emotionally where we wanted them at that point, then we've done the play well. And so everything then came into place from there. And there was a little revolve on a rake, which was just desperately useful. And we had, and then we just had some tricksy things to just keep the thing moving, because ultimately we go from inside a barn, outside a barn, in the woods. But it's nice to change the visual on that occasionally.
Yeah, because I guess it's asking a lot. Potter asks a lot of an audience to, if he's asking you to remember how it feels as a child to sit on blades of grass and breathe in the air, and then what it's like to go into the cool air of a barn and stuff. If you're in a theatre, that's asking a lot of the audience and obviously the designer. I've now just put up the images of the Life musical, which is very much a different look. So tell us about.
Yeah, so we did this out in the English Theatre in Frankfurt, and this the musical itself, it's written by Kandra and Ebb, so it's guys who wrote Cabaret in Chicago, and it's sort of wonderful. It's not as the music is not as good as Cabaret and Chicago, but it's still it's still their style, and it's all about the prostitutes working in Manhattan in the 60s. I think it was the 60s. Yeah. And so the director was coming to it from a point of view of not wanting to drench this in a history lesson. So this is, there's been plenty of productions that have done this with a very, very 60s reality. And it didn't feel necessary to do that. And there was nothing, certainly that I can remember now, there was nothing within the piece which needed it to be rooted in the 60s. So we simply took this central idea of the windows. Yeah. It's an Amsterdam thing rather than New York, but nevertheless, it's quite an iconic image that you've got these strip lights in windows and your little cubicle behind. And the whole set was this framework. And it was on 3 sides. And then there were sort of these units that came out, and there were staircases and whatever, but it was all about being able to compartmentalize these lozenges, basically. And then we had these movable frames, which sort of came away from there, which is one of the pictures you've got down there, bottom right. These movable frames with the lights in just became sort of really useful tools for the choreography and things like that. Yeah. But again, that was one of those which, starting with this simple idea of we're going to constantly reference these red light windows and the entire architecture of the space and of the New York that we put in front of the audience was based on that. And it is extraordinary how much of everything else, all the other details, the brain just fills in.
Well, yeah, obviously it has the idea of neon, which is indicative of the 60s anyway, but then the idea that these frameworks can represent several different things throughout the night. It was something I've always been very fond of as a director. If you've got a thing on a stage serving one purpose for a long while, and then it morphs into a different thing later into the night, the audience feel quite involved and clever that they saw that there waiting to be used.
Yeah, very much so. I think that's a really good point. I mean, it felt kind of simple as a solution by the time everything was in place. But there was a lot. I mean, the thing, thankfully, was able to just constantly keep changing. It was changing of space, and it was changing of what was lit up. And because the lighting designer had individual control over every single one of those battens, and they're all over the place. And so it was initially an utter nightmare for him and for the technical department putting them in, just making sure that, he had them all on their individual patterns. But what's nice for me is that ultimately I end up getting the credit, which doesn't bother me at all.
So there is slightly less lighting on Chinglish, which is one of those sets, I guess, that might frustrate a set designer after the event, because it can be described as oh so simple. And it looks like it's just been put there, which I imagine is not necessarily the case. And actually, as a segue to that, or as a side to that, is that ever genuinely a compliment, or does it make your teeth itch?
No, it doesn't make my teeth itch. I do like the simple as a compliment, because it suggests, whilst I don't think this is necessarily the case, but it does suggest that there is an elegance maybe, or there is a style. I mean, obviously having simplicity without elegance is just slightly painful, but I'm ultimately, I look back, and I'm looking back at these photos now of work that I've done, and I hope this is normal, but I'm slightly embarrassed by just, I think, everything that I've done. You always look back and you think, these things should have been better. There should have been a classier detail. There should have been, more refinement, or something about the proportion got away with me, or whatever it was. So I'm constantly traumatized by the sight of my own work, but I take it that people keep asking me back. So there's clearly something is going okay. But no, with Chinglish, it was, oh my goodness me, the production manager after the event said to me he thought I was mad. And I wanted to say to him, why didn't you tell me that before I tried to build this? Because this was insane. And it was so insane that whilst these pictures that I've got in front of me here, that you've got, show 2 scenes, there was 8 scenes, and they were so complex that I just never had the chance to photograph any more than 2. It was, if I had a chance to stand there and photograph my own work, then I should have been using the time better to make the thing move smoothly. It was basically, it was based on a Chinese puzzle. The play is about how impregnable Chinese culture is to Western businessmen, and it's a brilliant play. It's very funny. And so I had this idea that those Chinese puzzles, they're called burr puzzles, and there's all sorts of crazy ones, but there was one particularly that I thought could be useful, and it's like the cube that sort of is a snake, and you've got to build it in only a certain way, and that makes the cube. And so I put on stage this matrix of blocks. And they're all sort of interconnected in different ways. So they'd open up to form a window, then another load would open up to form a door, and you go, that's all fine. And then others would open up in a different way, and you go, that so far is okay. That would have been achievable, but it wouldn't have looked as insane as it needed to look, as a piece of something to work out. This needed to look sort of beyond geometry. And so I fixed the panels together with, and when I say it's because it was me building it. I couldn't find a builder to build this for me because they said it wouldn't work. That should have been an alarm bell. But they were all fixed together on long hinges, but the hinges weren't physically attached to the back of the panels. They were steel hinges and then strips of magnets on the back. And then they all had little tabs on them, so that the stage manager behind the set, for preparing for any given scene, they would change the magnets, change what hinges were attached and which hinges weren't. So you had a totally different matrix of doors and windows could open. And at one point we had a bed that sort of swung in, and then these bits filled its place. And that, where the bed was, that was also earlier on, that was a doorway and a shelving unit. And the audience, when it worked, it was great because the audience couldn't grasp where these things came from. Sure. But that was a case of just nailing, this is the right idea. I cannot ditch this idea. It is right. I have to make it work.
And that must be quite...
Just did.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, knowing how magnets work, I have horrifying scenes of if 2 like forces are opposing one another and the set begins to revolve if the 2 pieces. But yeah, I can imagine that that's quite a not a relaxing conversation to have. Budget aside or personalities aside, if you go, you've hired me because you like my work, you like my ideas, you like my passion, so therefore occasionally my ideas are going to be a bit, no, you're going to have to trust me on this. To be in the room going, no, really, you're going to have to, you have to trust me on this. That must be quite... Well, I guess occasionally that can be quite exciting if people are going to go, oh, yes, all right, I'm terrified, but go ahead.
Well, I trust my instincts enough. I think there's been enough occasions where you've hit the net. Trust me.
Yeah.
I feel that I've had enough of those moments where I'm like the only person in the room who appears sane, and obviously when that is the case, clearly you're not. Clearly you're wrong if you're the only person. Yeah. But there's been a number of times when I've gone, do you know, maybe I'm just not articulating it. Maybe I'm not showing you how good this will be. But every part of my instinct is saying that this will work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, thankfully that's happened enough now that I think I'm able to gauge it. And if I think something really will work, then I'll push for it. But as I say, this was about the hard work. It wasn't about the budget or or the time. It was just, will the thing work?
Yeah.
Will the thing work, or will it fall down and be a laughing stock? That was the concern.
Much like these interviews, I feel every week I panic. I wonder how they're going to go. On that note, where we are sort of like getting to the last 6 minutes or so, and there's a couple of things to talk about. So briefly, let's talk about Treasure Island, which is how many years old for you now?
Maybe it's between 15 and 20.
Okay. And I imagine the Brian Lavery one a couple of years back, so I imagine it's pre that script. So, well, even with the National Theatre, we must have had the same conversations of how to bring a sequence and scenes to stage where we, the audience, are probably already have a fairly good idea of what we're expecting to see. You don't have much freedom to do your own thing with it unless that's part of the actual brief.
Well, I think that's interesting, because Treasure Island is one of those books that everybody sort of knows about, and yet very few people have read, I think. And so the amount of visual expectation that they're bringing to it is, at best, minimal. And at worst, it's just completely misguided.
Yeah.
But I mean, I enjoyed this one. There's something. It's Mike Bartlett's script, and he writes in a way which is just theatre. There's no sense that this was ever going to be difficult to put on stage because it's too cinematic or that sort of thing. So in reading it, it's one of the few times actually that I've read a script and almost been able to visualize the whole thing. I certainly had an image of the first transition out of the bar into somewhere. I had that enough in my head that I could draw it. And in the process of drawing, you sort of create some kind of style and a proportion. And that's enough to make me realize that hopefully I didn't picture somebody else's work and just copy it. You never quite know. If an idea comes too easily, you go, that must have been somebody else's. But that was one where I could see the show. And I think it's because the writing was so wonderful,
And that's a really important, if you're able to sort of like go, if while reading the script, an image is coming to you, rather than you having to work for the image and go, how would I design that? But as you're reading it, an image comes to you. That's a real good breaking of the seal. You go, if I can get that image straight away, it's very likely that will then, the DNA of that will naturally lead to the next image and the next image.
Yeah, absolutely. There was something about the shapes that came out of that sort of first proper working session in the studio that it just seemed to land. And the dynamic, even though when you're sketching, obviously it is two-dimensional and you try to get dimension into it, but it's not the same. You never really know until you're in the model stage where this is going to have a dynamic about it. And just every step of the way, it just felt like it all supported the script. I hope the people involved in it felt like that. I mean, it seemed to be, as I say, it's a long time ago, but it's a rarity. Most of the time, it's an agonizing struggle. But no, that was nice. Actually, I liked. I'd do it, Mike Bartlett again in a heartbeat for that very reason.
Yeah, and you speak about it being pure theatre as opposed to being cinematic. But the last couple of projects we are going to talk about are by their nature both of those things. They are theatre and cinematic because they're the Secret Cinema. The image that I just pulled up there is Moulin Rouge. Was this your first work for Secret Cinema, or had you done work for them before?
No, I did 28 Days Later before this. And then 28 Days Later was quite was quite an intense experience,
Mm.
and it's quite a learning experience, I think, going from this fixed view into suddenly an entire environment. And I loved it. I don't know how good I was at it. I don't think that I don't look back and think that I did anything that anybody else couldn't have done. But it's such an intense process that I guess getting to the end of it is something that a lot of people would have not managed to do. So when Moulin Rouge came along, it's just, I snapped it up. Just go, wow, yeah, amazing. And then the show that the directors delivered was way beyond my expected excitement. I mean, I thought it was going to be a great show, but then I guess this is how it sort of ties back into this lockdown feeling. There was something about just getting just an audience together and just leading them in this sort of festival of love, in a really positive spirited thing. And I guess that's what theatre is going to miss for a little while. It's great to be able to do stuff with televising, as a lot of things work very, very well like that. And as much that can be televised live, I know this isn't the question that you asked, sorry, but as much can be done live, obviously clearly will be great. But the thing I will miss in this socially distanced era is just being in a group of people who are all excited at the same time.
And I guess you were saying that with 28 Days Later, you weren't necessarily aware of what you might have been doing that anybody else might have done in the same job. But, you did Moulin Rouge again, and you did the next thing that we're going to talk about. And I wonder if there's an element of that with, suggesting a set that we've made out of a Chinese puzzle box with magnets and saying that will work. There's a sense with Secret Cinema and the director of Secret Cinema going, this is, demonstrably a ridiculous idea. It's demonstrably an insane idea to do. Let's go ahead and do it. And there's that must be part of why the gig happens and why the gig happens for you.
Well, I think that was the interesting clash at that time, because whilst the team there now, I think I have much more parity of thought than I did at the time of Moulin Rouge. We were still sussing each other out at Moulin Rouge, and I do remember there was the whole of Montmartre that we put in there. I was absolutely determined we didn't build a film set, because if an audience member just sort of starts to walk into a film set and investigates it as a set, then I think we've lost them in the story. So it needed to be something theatrically elevated from that.
Immersive.
Sorry?
Immersive, in fact. Genuinely immersive.
I know, crazy thought. Yeah, an actual immersive set. And there was also, I certainly can't deny that finances were part of that as well. That obviously building walls everywhere and having to scenically decorate, set dress, all those sorts of things, just eats money. And so my proposal to them was to basically take away all the walls. We had, it's not an original idea for theatre at all, but there was a lot of skeletal framework that was all in sort of crazy angles, but it was to give the sense of Montmartre being just slightly, jaunty angles in every direction, and things overhanging and cables and just sort of this mess of life, really. And it was to give that. And I do remember having a number of conversations with the creative director and just saying, no, this will work. strongly thinking it flipping better work. There's a lot riding on this now.
Yeah.
What I didn't predict was how well it would work, and that sense that when you've got a group of people being taught life drawing classes by Toulouse-Lautrec in this area over here, that they feel like they're in a protected area, and yet their experience can be seen by people who are going through another experience, maybe bartering over an old book in the Montmartre bookshop with some people, and just all those pockets of life fighting for their position in this area was a very thrilling thing. So I guess it's when my theatre instincts come over into the cinema side. So and I feel that as we worked more and more, because we've done 4 together now, yeah. I think that's been easier every time. I think I understand the audiences better now, and I think the directors understand probably me a little bit better now.
And one of those 4 is Blade Runner, which is, because I guess with 28 Days Later and with Moulin Rouge and whatever, conceptually the audience can understand those worlds. We can understand a world in which everyone else is dead, and we can understand a world that's France, but back then, and with a can show. We can Blade Runner is quite genuinely a different world, and apart from that iconic sort of opening shot of the Sony adverts and whatever, as the machines, the craft swoops in, it's perhaps the market below, drenched with rain. It's genuinely a different world. Does that make it more challenging, or is that more give you more freedom?
I think the challenge with that one was more financial, I would say. Trying to put my mind back into where it was at the time, but it always felt that to make that world in some way believable, you had to be able to feel like you were getting lost. You had to feel like you get drawn around a corner because of something that's going on, but then you'd go through a doorway and then through another corner because there's these other things. And each time there's some new sort of image that you're presented with at every turn. And then before you know it, you go, crikey, I have no idea where I am.
Yeah.
I don't know what part of the site I'm on. And I've lost my own children. That was generally a sense, if you could get lost, I thought we'd done well. And I guess these the concept sketches that I did here, they're all really about that. And adding in the rain, adding in the neon, all those things are a useful tool. Yeah. But if it's an open arena, then it doesn't work. So simply by the scale and the amount of walls effectively that you've got to build as soon as you want to try to make people get lost, that becomes a very challenging thing, certainly. So we had a lot of different treatments for that. I think that was our way around it. We had a lot of meshes, coloured plastics, load of corrugated metal and scaffolding, as you would expect, load of walls made out of lashed together pallets and broken things that have been repurposed, lots of little corners that had been sort of taken over by certain groups who might have lived there, so the scavengers and people who had certain memories. So there was a lot of life, and with that, obviously, we just have a lot of set dressing challenges when there isn't limitless money, and also when you are immersed in it and it's not about a camera angle, you've got to be able to be in it and to turn 360, and you can't drop that reality. Whereas at least with a camera, you can say, if it's above this line, don't bother with it,
Because if you want your audience to get lost and wander off, then they're going to wander off. And if the paint stops there, and they can see the back of the set, then it sort of upsets that illusion. I want to sort of begin to wind up now, which is a shame because just obviously for me at least could have gone on for another 3 hours or whatever. But I guess what would be interesting for me to ask is, bearing in mind the environment that you're in right now, if there was a new script of a Billy Wilder film and you were asked how you would put that in a set. Maybe there's different sets for Chicago and different sets for, but maybe that first image that you drew for this potential production, what would be your image that you'd go, oh, that's going to hook me in?
It would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It would be really great. For me, the starting point would be the jazz club. You know, if you're talking about sort of getting an audience on side, a jazz club which is partly controlled by the mafia, or the hoods of the time.
Yeah.
Visually and sound-wise, fantastic, just a fabulous hoot. And then I guess you'd get taken through the back door of the jazz club into the back, and you see you shouldn't see. Yeah. And you're maybe asked to be complicit in the bootlegging of various substances, and suddenly you're holding information which makes you dangerous to know. And throw in a little bit of just casual cross-dressing.
Yeah, I guess it hadn't even occurred to me that it being an immersive show, but it occurred just as you spoke about that now. Obviously, the most gorgeous way to transfer your audience from Chicago to the end is literally stick them on the train and to have that sort of going from one to the other.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
I mean,
great. Because of course I thought of it as a normal theatre, as it were, but I don't know whether a script exists. I know that it was done as a musical.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I've never seen it, never read it. But just anything that evokes that era. If you're going to do that show, keep it true to that era, so that we absolutely understand the peril and the glamour of the of what they're living through.
Beautiful,
a great show.
Well, it will be beautiful. I'm trying to sort of I can only think of the quote "Nobody's perfect," and that's not the appropriate quote for now. But yeah, it will be a gorgeous show. So yeah, summer 2025. I'm reckoning that we'll look out for it then.
Okay.
So thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
It's been a lovely conversation. Lovely to catch up. We hope to sort of see you again soon in the real world. So thank you, Tim.
Exactly. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care. Thank you. So that was Tim McQuillen-Wright talking to us about his work and possibly stuff for the future. We'll be back again with another chat at Cast Iron Interviews for Friday nights. We hope to catch you and see you again soon. Bye-bye.